Okay, so the format that we're putting out here for these classes is that we want to introduce every class. We want to introduce a Kabbalistic concept, explain what that would mean. Then we want to explain the ramifications of what this idea helps the Kabbalah explain phenomenon in the universe and in the world and in our soul as we know it. So in other words, you have the abstract idea, and then you have how the idea influences our understanding of the universe and of ourselves. And finally, the question is, what's the practical application in our life? So that's sort of, we go from the theoretical, from the idea, and try to bring it down into our own life. I'm just going to excuse myself and close the window because there's noise behind me. I apologize. Now, the challenge that we face today is that the idea that we want to introduce is so general and so all-encompassing to so many Kabbalistic ideas. So the challenge is going to be to limit it and try to explain certain aspects of it. But it's a really fundamental idea within the Kabbalah, or how Kabbalah understands the universe. And that is the doctrine of what the Kabbalah calls the Shvirat HaKelim, which means the breaking of the vessels. And there's this idea of the breaking of the vessels that explains a lot of the phenomenon in the universe as we know it. And like I said, it also illuminates, according to the Kabbalah, most of what we do in our life in this world is about responding to this problem, this idea of the breaking of the vessels. So I first want to lay the idea out and then explain why it's so important and what exactly it explains and why it's so significant. So the idea is as follows. You start in the Kabbalah, you start with God. You start with God's infinite light. And the way the story goes is as follows. Last week we discussed a little bit about the 10 Sfirot. So God projects specific expressions of his infinity, and those expressions are called Sefirot, and that's how the world is created. But before the world was created, the problem here is that there's a falling, there's a break, there's a trauma. What happens? What happens is that the light that God projects is too powerful. And if you think about, if you have any metaphor of if the vessel cannot contain the light, that's the language that Kabbalah uses. In simple English, it would mean if your light bulb cannot contain the amount of electricity that is going through the wire, what happens? It's going to shatter. And when it shatters, it breaks. And when it breaks, it falls down and becomes many, many pieces. And the Kabbalah is telling of the history of how God creates the world. That's exactly what happens. So you have the infinite light of God. God projects 10 energies: kindness, wisdom, compassion, whatever they are. We're not going to get into the details. The problem is that those lights are so intense that they shatter the containers. The light has a vessel, the light has a container. The light bulb has the glass that contains it. And when that shatters, those shattered vessels fall very low. They fall to what the Kabbalah would call the realm of unholiness. And they sort of disconnect from their divine spiritual source. According to the Kabbalah, that's where you get unholiness in the world. That's where you get negativity in the world. Now, it's our job when the human being comes into this world and lives in this world, really what we're really trying to do, if you want to get to the essence, we are actually collecting those sparks and those shattered vessels that fell very low. We're collecting them, reconnecting them, healing them, reconnecting them to their source. And essentially, when we finish doing that, that's when the world reaches perfection. So you may have heard of the Jewish concept called Tikkun Olam, perfecting the world, which now comes to mean, now people use it as social justice, and it does mean social justice, But the origin is the Kabbalistic term, tikkun olam, correcting the world, means correcting those fallen sparks. And like I said, this idea is very important for the Kabbalah. Hopefully I'll be able to explain a little bit why it's so important and how many ideas it explains within the universe and within our own life. And then we also want to think about, okay, so what does it mean? What does it mean practically in our life? In the meantime, if anybody has any comments, questions, please don't hesitate. Please jump in. We're a small group. The advantage is you could jump in whenever you like.
Well, just one thing that
Sure.
that jumps out at me is that this idea of not being able to contain the light sounds a lot like what we call the Big Bang Theory in science.
Right. So that's very interesting. So you have the shattering. The only thing I would say is that with the Big Bang Theory, I think the idea is that explosion is actually the source of all life in the sense that it's a positive. In the Kabbalah, it's, how do I say this? There is a negativity that we have to correct. Now, once we finish explaining, we'll go back and we will revisit, and maybe they are closer than I'm presenting it right now. Maybe they are actually closer. So we'll get back to that in a second. So again, why do I need the doctrine of the shattering of the vessels? What does it do for us? It does many things, but just one aspect of what it does to us is as follows. If we believe, as Judaism does, as the Kabbalah does, that everything has to come from a divine source. In other words, when you say, in Judaism, when you say God is one, it means God is the source for everything. Now, one of the most difficult theological questions, of course, is how is there evil in this world? How is there pain? How is there negativity? So other faiths, certainly pagan faiths, but even other monotheistic faiths, they don't have that big problem. Why? Because what they say is, look, they say God is a source of goodness. God is a source of healing. God is a source of everything wonderful. And the negativity in the world comes from something else. Call it Satan, call it what you want. But there's this domain that's not related to holiness, not related to godliness. And they paint the world as sort of this battle between God and Satan. And when God's asleep, Satan takes over, or when God is not powerful or disinterested, Satan takes over. And that's where you have negativity in the world. So you ask, how is there negativity in the world? Don't blame God. There's some other force that is responsible for the negativity. Now that works wonderful, but not if you follow the Jewish faith. Because the Jewish faith is Hashem Echad, God is one. In other words, the ultimate source for everything is oneness, not duality. That means ultimately everything has to come from God. Now the question is, how is it possible that a God who is holy, pure, good, how does that lead? How do you get to the ability to have negativity, pain, or in general what the Kabbalah would call klipa, the peel, the other side, the side that's not holy? How does that come from God? And one of the things that the breaking of the vessels does for us is when there's a break, think about, of course, everything in its origin started out with God. But because God is so powerful, the container couldn't contain it. Now the vessel smashed, now it fell down. When it falls down, it becomes negative. But it's not, so what it does that for us is that the origin is good, but the way it is now after the fall, it's negative. Go back to the metaphor of a light bulb. Is a light bulb good or bad? Well, when it's giving light, it's wonderful. But if it breaks and now you have a piece of glass on the floor, now not only is it not positive, but it's negative. It can harm you. It could harm you. It could hurt you. But on the other hand, where does this come from? Of course it comes from holiness. Of course it comes from the vessel. Before it was shattered, it came from God. But then there was a shattering. The shattering represents a break from its source, right? You have an evolution. Evolution, it doesn't break from the source. It just evolves from the source. But negativity would not be able to evolve from God because God is all positive. So the evolution would not get negativity from God. In the Kabbalah, evolution would be the Seder Hishtalshalut. It's called the order of the chain of the worlds, where things evolve and the light is diminished from level to level. That evolution could happen within the realm of holiness, where the holiness could be diminished. But to get to unholiness, to get to negativity, to get to evil, you're not going to get evil through an evolution from God. For that, you need a break. You need a disconnect from the source. So on one hand, everything begins with the source of God. On the other hand, there has to be a break. And the break is one of the things that the shattering of the vessels does for us. What it does for us is that it tells us that on one hand, everything comes from God. So the negativity we see has a divine source, but its current manifestation is negative. Go ahead, Vicky.
Yeah, I have a question. So from the perspective of a creator, was it by design that the vessels couldn't contain, that they were supposed to break? And when it comes to the Big Bang, I think it's closer to Tzimtzum. I think something from nothing. So, that was kind of a thought about the previous question. But my main question is, was it by design?
The answer is yes. It's not a mistake. God wants to create negativity in the world so that there should be free choice, so that there should be meaning to creation, so the human being should be able to correct, because that's where we get meaning in this world, and we can contribute something. If everything is holy, if everything is pure, if everything is tranquil and wholesome, then there's no human contribution and there's no free choice. So by design, there has to be negativity, there has to be evil. And the point here is that the way the evil on one hand comes from God, on the other hand, its current manifestation is so connected from God, that's where you have a breaking. And the breaking was by design. How do you break something? Ironically, you put too much good. We'll get into this. Too much good, too much light, too much energy will break the vessel. So we're going to get to that aspect in a moment. Go ahead, Sarah. I don't hear you. You're on mute.
Sorry. In other words, Kabbalah doesn't believe in the evil force or Satan bringing about, negativity and sins.
We don't believe that Satan appears in the Bible, in the book of Job. We don't believe Satan as an independent force. Satan is that negativity in the world that seeks to challenge the person. So there is negativity. We're not blind to negativity. The question is, does the negativity have its own independent source, or is negativity itself an agent of God to create a stumbling block for us so that we should seek to overcome it? So, but you're right, as an independent force, as a force that is sort of parallel or conflicting with God and independent of God and battling God, no, Satan, that's Satan Judaism does not accept, and Kabbalah certainly not.
So going back to the fallen angel, that does not exist in Kabbalah. Because
there is the notion of fall, but notice that there is a notion that notice the angels that fall. But again, the point here is that even in the fall, the origin and the source of their energy is God. In other words, if somebody would not have divine energy, they would not be able to exist. If evil would not have divine energy, it wouldn't be able to exist. And the fact that it exists is because it has holiness in it. So everything has holiness within it. So why does it appear so evil? Because those sparks of holiness that are within it, they have fallen. And they have fallen means they are disconnected from their source. And the question, we have to correct them. We'll see how to do that. We have to correct them. And the way we correct them, when we correct them, we once again heal them by bringing them back to the source. And then you realize that Satan wasn't really Satan all along. Satan was really divine energy that expressed itself in a negative way, and we heal it and we reconnect it to its source, and we become full circle.
I love that. The disconnection. The
Right.
Disconnection, creating the negativity and evil. That's beautiful.
Correct. Yes. Okay, so that's just one notion. I'm just going to give you a few more ideas that you see here that are sort of spin-offs of this big idea And then again, then we're going to try to bring it home and bring it practical in our life. So one point is this. So let's make a little progress here. Why is it that if you look at the world, okay, how did the vessels break? Because the light was too powerful. So Kabbalah continues, after God creates those very powerful energies that end up breaking the vessels, that didn't work. Wasn't a mistake, but it didn't work. So what does that God then do? Then God, once again, he says, we're going to go for take two. And take two is now he diminishes the light. And when he diminishes the light, he'll then project 10 energies, what the Kabbalah would call 10 sfirot. If you ever heard anything about the Kabbalah, you heard of the 10 sfirot. Those 10 sfirot are the 10 sfirot of holiness, and they're the root of holiness, and then the root of our souls. It's all in the realm of holiness, what the Kabbalah would call the world of order. But the world of order follows the broken vessels, which again, the vessels broke because the energy was too powerful. So to create what we call goodness, what we call holiness, you have to actually diminish the light. And when you diminish the light, you can create, the light will not shatter the vessels, and you can create a realm of holiness. Okay, fine. What does that do for us? What does that show us? So one of the things that does for us, it explains why is it that when I look out in the world, very often it looks like, and it is true, that the forces of negativity are actually stronger than the forces of holiness. Now, not only is this true in the world around us, but in some sense, it's also true within ourselves, right? Because so the Kabbalah is going to explain, maybe we'll talk about it in 2 weeks, that everybody has two souls. We have the godly soul, we have the natural soul. If you look at yourself, I have some tendencies. We're human beings, so we're a hybrid. We have a spiritual side and we have a materialistic side. The spiritual side has certain desires, and the materialistic side has certain desires, which sometimes, if they get out of control, they can be destructive. So how come when I have a destructive desire, to me personally, I'm not going to speak for you, but I'll speak for myself, that destructive desire could seem much stronger than the holy and pure desire, right? I want to go volunteer this afternoon. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. If there's an obstacle, I won't. I also want to eat a chocolate cake. And if I want to eat chocolate cake, nothing is going to stop me, because my desire is so powerful, it's very hard for me to contain it. So if I look in the world around me, also if I look within myself, it appears that sometimes destructive desires and destructive energies have actually have more energy, more power, more strength than the positive desire. How does that happen? Why is there an imbalance, right? I want to read every book in the library. Doesn't mean I'm going to do it. Maybe yeah, maybe no. I want to have dessert. Nothing is going to stop me, right? So what does that tell me? It tells me that the animalistic, sometimes destructive or natural soul, but sometimes the destructive force within myself, which everybody has both. Sometimes if you don't know how to contain it, you have to know how to contain it. If you don't know how to contain it, it's actually much stronger. If you want a metaphor, think about it as the human being and an animal. You have an ox. Who's stronger? The ox is stronger than the human being. The advantage of the human being is that the human being has the mind. So the human being can figure out how to get the ox to work for him, how to get the ox to plow the field, right? But in some sense, if you don't tame the ox is much stronger than you. Don't try to fight an ox head on. It's much more powerful. And the same thing is within the person. I have my spiritual desires, my spiritual side. That's like the human being. That's like the mind. But then I have the raw emotion of the heart. And sometimes if I'm not going to control it and contain it and direct it, it can be much more destructive. So how come when my mind tells me something is good for me, it's not as powerful as when I desire it, even though intellectually I know that what I desire actually may be negative and may be destructive. So why is it that the negativity has an unfair advantage? And what is the answer? The Kabbalistic answer is because the negativity originates from those lights that were shattered. And remember, why did the light shatter? The light shattered because they were too powerful. So they are residue of intense spiritual light. I know that down here, they don't look spiritual and they don't look positive because of the fall. But the negativity we see in ourselves and the negativity we see in the world is in fact residue of extremely intense light, even more intense. In other words, it has a higher source than what we call holiness. What is our job when we say we have to now correct the vessels or correct the sparks or elevate the sparks? What we're really doing now is we're saying, look, the ultimate goal is if you can apply your world of order, which means your holy realm, which is the diminished lights, which is much more balanced, and if you could now direct the destructive energy within the world and within yourself and direct that to holiness, which is really its source, now what you do is you have both advantages. You have the advantage of the world of the broken vessels, which the Kabbalah calls the world of chaos, but the world of chaos is directed by the world of order. Go back to the metaphor. If the human being could teach the ox, direct the ox how to express its force and its strength, then you can create agriculture. You can create something positive. The human being himself, I don't have the power to plow the field. But if I get the animal to plow the field, I'm taking the force, the destructive force of the animal, which could be destructive, but I'm directing it, and that's how I'm becoming. That's how I am correcting the world, by taking the force of negativity and directing it to holiness. So what does it mean in practical terms? In practical terms, within myself, if I could use that, if I could redirect that energy of my destructive desires and somehow channel that my positive desires should have the same strength as my destructive desires, that's ultimately correction. Then I'm taking the fallen sparks, taking their energy, reconnecting it to its source, and that now fuels my desire to come closer to holiness and to do good in this world. So that's just a little bit more, another element of what the doctrine of the fallen sparks does for us. First of all, it explains why there's negativity in the world, why there's evil in the world. And it also, like I said, and part of that is to explain what the goal is. The goal is to correct the world. But another point that we just mentioned is that it also explains how and why it seems that the negativity is stronger than the positivity. And the answer is because in its source, it actually has a higher source within God. That doesn't mean that the negativity is good. That means that the holiness now has to help the negativity redefine itself and understand the meaning of its passion. The meaning is because that it comes from the fact that it's an expression of a very deep source within God, very deep energy within God. Go ahead, Richard.
A question on what you just mentioned. You said negativity comes from a higher source?
Yes. You look at the metaphor. Before God creates the world, God has to create the world. God is infinite. So God projects 10 energies, the 10 spherotes. Kabbalah says the first set of spherot that God projects, it doesn't last. Why not? It breaks. Why does it break? Because the light is too intense. If the light is too intense, it shatters the vessels. The vessels are the containers of the light. Those shattered vessels and their sparks fall down, and they fall, because they fall, they're distant from God, and that's the energy of the negativity. Now that didn't work, so God does take two. Like Vicky pointed out before, it wasn't a mistake, it's all by design. But take number two is now God projects 10 energies, but they're called the light of order, because he diminishes the intensity of the light. Now the light is diminished. Now there's no break. So the creation is holy. It's holy, but it's not as intense. Because remember, why did the unholiness shatter? Why did the energy of the broken vessels shatter? Because the light was too intense. So it turns out that when you see something unholy in this world, if you look at its source, which is what the Kabbalah loves to do, in the source, unholiness has a higher source than holiness.
But the point that
Go ahead.
the source of everything is Hashem. That's the source of everything.
Correct.
So, but when you're saying a higher source, that's
Higher
like
God. Everything comes from God. But with God, according to the Kabbalah, God projects certain energies, and those energies are sources for certain phenomenon. And the difference between the created phenomenon is because of the difference of how much divine energy they have. Why am I different than you? Because the specific divine energy that creates me is a little bit different than the specific divine energy that creates you. Why is holiness different than unholiness? Because the divine energy that creates holiness is different than the divine energy that creates unholiness. In what way is it different? Well, according to the Kabbalah, generally speaking, unholiness comes from what they would call the world of the broken vessels, which originate in what we would call the world of chaos, which basically means those first 10 lights that God projects are too powerful. They're so intense and they're so powerful, they can't create anything. I'll give you a few examples where, okay, I don't want to go too far off the topic, but intensity sometimes creates chaos. And when you have less light, it actually allows for order because it allows for compromise. But that's sort of another whole, I don't know, I hesitate to go there. So for example, let's say you have two people and people are very talented and they feel very strongly about their ideas. And you put them both in a room and they have different ideas. One person is kind and one person believes in discipline. You have two parents. One parent is very, very kind. And one parent believes in discipline because he believes the best thing for the child is discipline. But they feel very strongly about that, about their beliefs, to the extent that they're not willing to compromise. You put them in a room, what's going to happen? What's going to happen is it's going to be a break. They're going to get into a fight. They cannot build a family. They cannot build a home. Why? Because they're bad people? No. Because their emotions are so powerful and so intense, they can't compromise. Now, scenario number two, also two parents, also one has kindness and one has discipline, but their emotions are not as intense. So now what happens? Now they could actually sit in the room and they can compromise. And if they compromise, they can build a family. So what turns out, who ends up building the family? Who creates order? The person that his emotions are less intense. The people who got into a fight with each other because they can't compromise. So the reality is now there's a break, now there's negativity. But what's the origin of the problem? The origin is not that they're not good people. To the contrary, the kind person is so kind. And the person who believes in discipline, so to the degree, to a very powerful degree. They're actually closer. In other words, in some sense, they're more spiritual. They're more in touch with their own identity. But because it's so intense, they can't compromise. They can't compromise, there'll be a shattering, right? So again, this idea is so much, there's so many ramifications of this idea and so many applications in our life, also about within ourselves, how to build relationships, how to understand that not all emotions, some emotions, when they're too intense, they can create chaos. You have to limit the emotion to create order. There's so much here. There's so much here, but we can't cover everything in one day. Just to summarize so far before we move forward, so we had the big idea that was the doctrine of the breaking of the vessels. That we had the big idea, which was the doctrine of the breaking of the vessels, which means that the light is the divine light, the infinite light is too intense, and therefore it shatters the vessels. The sparks fall down, and that's where you get negativity and unholiness. And then we explained why the unholiness is more powerful, because it has a higher source. Now, another thing you get from now we're going to move forward a little bit. Another thing that you get with the shattering of the vessels is you get an all-around state of confusion. There's no clarity. And you don't understand what's happening in your life. And by correcting the shattering of the vessels, you get order. And all of a sudden, what was causing you tension and was causing you tension and what's the word? A fragmentation, now is actually bringing you order. And here's the metaphor that Kabbalah uses. Okay, here's the metaphor. The metaphor is Take a word or a sentence. Let's take a sentence. A sentence, you have an idea. So every letter in the sentence serves a purpose. It expresses an idea. And if I read the sentence, provided I know how to read, the idea has been conveyed, this clarity of vision, this clarity of purpose, this order, everything makes sense. Even though I have many letters, but it's still one idea. So I have oneness. If I have oneness, I have peace, I have serenity. Okay, what happens if I come and I take these letters and I scramble the letters? So now instead of these same letters expressing meaning, right now, the letters, not only do they not have any meaning, but they're actually confusing. I can't figure out what goes first, the A or the B. I have no idea what these letters are doing here. I don't know why I have all these letters. It's not letting me think it because the A is pulling me in one direction, the B is pulling me in another direction. I'm in a state of utter confusion. And the Kabbalah, that's another metaphor that the Kabbalah uses. When the shattering of the vessels happen, it's not only a shattering. Sometimes when something shatters, you have a glass that shatters. Well, I could see there's big pieces. I could see this piece would go with that piece, and I could see the glass, and I could see how the glass would be rebuilt. Not only is it a shattering of the vessels, but it's also a scattering and a scrambling of those shattered sparks. So now there is a truth in the world. In other words, there is a truth, there is an idea in the world. If you go out in nature, you could see this as an expression of godliness. Because what is nature? What is science? What is this world? It's an expression of the Creator. So Maimonides says, when you look at the Creator, it's actually a tool. When you look at the creation, it's actually a tool to bring you close to the Creator. That's if you can read the letters. That's if you can see how the letters align and create meaning. But what happens if as a result of the shattering of the vessels, I don't see it that way? What I see is just a combination of many different, scrambling of many different things. I have many different desires. I wake up in the morning, I have to eat lunch, I have to get to work. I have this desire, that desire, I'm scrambled. I want to have a relationship with my child, but I also have negative desires. It's a mix, it's a scramble. I'm being pulled in all different directions. And at that point, the physical phenomenon of the world, my possessions, the possessions that I want, the reality of this world is actually contributing to confusion because it's not expressing the unified idea that the world is meant to express. Part of the idea of correcting the breaking of the vessels, in other words, looking at every spark and saying this spark fell down from a source, it actually is part of a larger story. We can reconnect it not just to its source, but also to the other sparks. And then these letters, which seem to be confusing, are actually telling a story. When I can scramble them back, or whatever the word is for unscramble them, and I could align those letters in my life to tell a unified story, that's where I have peace and serenity in my life. Which means everything in my life could either be contributing to my confusion, contributing to my robbing me of serenity, or that same phenomenon can actually add to my spiritual serenity, add to my spiritual connection to God. Same phenomenon. I didn't have to trade in anything I have or I don't have. But now when I look at it, I view order because I see its purpose. So for example, if I have whatever the case is, something physical, this physical thing, if it's a means to an end, it could be now be a distraction from my spiritual purpose. But if I view this physical phenomenon as not a means to an end, not an end to itself, I say this is here so that I can be a better person, so that I can be happy, so that it can bring me peace of mind, so that I can fulfill my mission on this earth, whatever that would be, depending on the person. Now, that physical phenomenon is not in conflict with my spiritual identity. It actually serves my spiritual identity. Now I'm no longer living a dichotomy. I'm not a spiritual person and a physical person. I'm not a person who wants to help other people, but also wants to eat lunch and also wants to enjoy themselves and also wants to go on vacation and also wants to be a good parent. That's fragmentation. Fragmentation is stress. One of the reasons why we're so stressed today is because we live a fragmented life. And if you weren't fragmented, then you just got an email that just pulled you your direction, your attention to another direction. And a second later, you got a text message that pulls your attention to another direction. It's fragmentation. Fragmentation robs us of peace. But if I can now unscrabble the letters, which means show how every physical phenomenon in this world comes from a spiritual source and is interconnected, not just with God, but also with the other physical things in my life. And the purpose of all of that is to tell a unified story to allow me to fulfill my mission in this earth. Now, instead of having a fragmentation, I have a unified sentence. Same letters. We don't believe in asceticism. We don't have to separate myself from the world. We're not saying possessions are bad or cars are bad or money is bad. No, everything is good. Vacations are good. Everything is good, provided that it's part of a story. Why am I doing this? So I can be a better person, so I can be a better parent, so I can fulfill my purpose. In that sense, one of the ways of correcting the scattering of the vessels is aligning them so that they tell a unified story. If they tell a unified story, I have peace and serenity in my life. Go ahead, Vicky.
Well, Rabbi, if you said that the scattering of the vessels is by design, so the scrambling is by design also. Yes. So if we are all engaged in this activity called Tikkun Olam, and everybody has its own spark, does it mean that we need to collaborate in that effort to kind of to put the pieces back together, and this is by design also?
In some sense, if everyone does their share, that's a text I have, I'm going to share it later. If everyone does their share, in other words, according to the Kabbalah, the world reaches perfection if everybody straightens out their sparks. So yes, yet, in other words, we are collaborating. Whether or not we know we're collaborating is another story. But there is a tipping point when the sparks from all the generations, all of history up to this point, there is a tipping point when the sparks have been corrected, and then all of a sudden, the consciousness changes, because you see change in this world. You see change. You look at not only ancient history, but more recent history. There were times when the values of human rights, for example, were not universally accepted. And you get to a point where all of a sudden people realize that this is a value, right? So how does that happen? So it happens through information becoming available, and it happens through education. There are many ways it happens in the physical sense, but in the spiritual sense, the way that happens is because there's a spiritual tipping point. Because for so many generations, good people are working toward this notion of correcting the world, and all of a sudden there's a transformation in the world, whether or not we realize that we are part of this tipping point. But at some point, there's a tipping point. And the same is true with correcting the world. When each person does corrects their corner of the world, we'll explain what that means. When each person corrects their corner of the world, ultimately that has a broader effect and that impacts the people around us. So the short answer is we are collaborating. Whether we have to be cognizant of this collaboration, it's probably better to do so, but I don't know if that's critical. In other words, ultimately the idea is if we elevate the sparks, eventually you make a puzzle, right? We're all making a puzzle. Not always do you realize that you're moving forward. But then all of a sudden one piece comes into the place and you say, now I see the picture, right? So if I don't see the picture, it doesn't mean I'm not contributing to the picture, right? In the earlier stages of the puzzle, we're collaborating, we're all running around, we each looks like we're all doing our own thing. But from the spiritual perspective, we're collaborating on a puzzle. And what's the puzzle going to say? The puzzle is going to tell us a story. What's the story? The story is the oneness of creation, the oneness of God, the unity, how we're all interconnected, right? That's really the 1,000-piece puzzle is really telling you one idea. But you have to align the pieces in the proper way to be able to understand what the 1,000-piece puzzle is telling you. If you don't align it, 1,000-piece puzzle could be very confusing, and it can actually give you a headache. And you won't even enter the room with the puzzle because who needs it?
Right. Thank you, Rabbi. It would be much better if we learn how to collaborate and we're aware of that.
Agreed. I'm not against collaboration. Agreed. Okay, now let's make a little bit more progress. We don't have that much time left. We'll make a little more progress. And here is the idea, according to the Kabbalah, when I use, so everything physical in this world, so I said evil, I said the evil comes from the breaking of the vessels, but the truth of the matter is it's not just evil, it's also evil. I don't want to get into evil right now because evil is a tricky word. The Kabbalah doesn't really always accept the word evil, but called destructiveness. Let's put that in for instead of evil, the destructive things in this world. But also everything physical also comes from the breaking of the vessels, the physical phenomenon of this world. Why is that? Because the physical phenomenon of this world, the physical creations don't feel connected to its source. Most things, naturally, something should be connected to its source. If my grandmother raised me, naturally, I feel a connection to her. Right? Naturally, things feel connected to the source. We feel connected to our parents naturally, unless there's something gets in the way. But naturally, everything feels connected to its source. Why is it that the physical reality doesn't feel connected to God? Answer: the breaking of the vessels. Because there's a breaking. A break means it doesn't evolve. When something evolves, you could say you could trace it back to its origin. But when something falls, the fall, there's no more ladder. So there's no steps. So if there's no steps, you can't trace it back to its origin. So the fall represents the disconnect. So in the physical world feels disconnected from its source. Okay, so the physical world feels disconnected from its source. What do I do? Says the Kabbalah, everything that we're doing in this world, if we do it for a spiritual purpose, if we're doing it for a spiritual purpose, we elevate the spark within that creation. And ultimately, over history, every person has the sparks that they come in contact with. I don't come in contact with the same sparks you do, because what you ate for lunch is different than what I ate for lunch. Now, let's take eating lunch as an example. If I'm eating lunch and it's totally and completely and only a physical experience, if that's all it is, I didn't elevate the spark. Well, that's not so true. If I eat lunch and then I went and I do a good deed with that energy. Okay. So I eat lunch and now I'm happy. So now I could smile to my child. Now I can call my grandmother. Now I could do something good in the world. What happens, what I just did is I took the spark that was in the physical phenomenon within the food, and because that becomes fuel to something spiritual and something holy, now I elevated that experience. And that spark that fell from its origin now is elevated back to its origin, mystically speaking. And now that part of the physical world is back connected to its source. That's one part. And it's also now telling the story, because now it turns out that lunch I ate is not a contradiction to spirituality. It's not a dichotomy. It's not something separate than spirituality, but it's actually food for spirituality. It's actually part of the sentence telling the spiritual story. And that is the idea of everything I do. Anytime I do something good, something good, and we're going to find as something holy. Anytime I do something good or holy or transcendent or giving to somebody else, what I'm doing now is I'm elevating all the sparks that I interacted with up to that point and elevating that to holiness. Now, if you want to be a little bit more, you want to look at it more expansively, you can actually say, and it's just true what the Kabbalah says this, is that not only that I elevate the sparks within my limited action, but you have to look at it in the most broadest sense. All the energy that was invested in creating this physical phenomenon, all that is elevated because at the end of the chain, I use it to do something good, right? So I have a car, so I would get out of my car to go and help somebody else. So it's not only that my car itself was elevated, but all the energy, the designers and the producers and the people who produce this object and the factories and the people who fuel the factory. If you think about it, if you want to get creative, if you want to really break down how everything is, how complex every product that we get today, how complex it is. It has pieces from all over the world, and there's so many in the modern economy, and there's so many various people and energy from various cultures and various parts of the world that come together to create one simple product. And I elevate that product because I'm using it for something holy. I'm looking at my computer, how much energy and design and thought was poured into this little item. We're using this to transcend. We're using this to connect. We're using this to study divine wisdom. We're using this for a spiritual purpose. All the energy poured into this is now reconnected to its source. Now, we don't necessarily see how the world is changing because we're talking spirituality on the computer. But that's because we're making the puzzle. And when we make the puzzle, we don't always see how the puzzle is almost finished. But the puzzle is one step closer because we're using something physical for a spiritual purpose. And ultimately, we will have that ultimate transformation where people now see and sense that the source of everything is holiness and godliness, what we call the Messianic era. That transformation happens over the period of history where everybody is elevating their sparks in their corner of the world, in their part of the world that's designed for them, and connecting that to its source. And together, we will get the whole puzzle. And that's why in Judaism, it's not about separating from the world. It's about sanctifying the world. The purpose is not to separate yourself from physicality. The purpose is to elevate physicality. That's the true spirituality, not asceticism, not separating from pleasures, but elevating it. So I want pleasure. Why do I want pleasure? Because after I enjoy this pleasure, now I am a better person. I'm more capable of being a better child, spouse, friend, boss, employee, citizen of the world, citizen of my country, member of society. And now I could contribute, and now I could transcend, and now I could be holy. And by doing so, I'm actually elevating everything that I have that led up to this point. And in that sense, the sparks are no longer broken sparks because they're part of the whole. They once again are telling the story of the unity within all of the world. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is the story in short, really, literally in a nutshell. There's so much more to say, but I think as an introductory idea, I think it's good. It helps us find clarity within our own life. And also the ramifications are immense. We look at the world, we look at ourselves, and we let's say I find that something destructive within myself. So we're trying to think of it as shame. I'm so bad. Look what I want to do. I woke up in the morning, I want to rob a bank. Oh, I'm such a terrible person, right? But once you look with the lens of the Kabbalah, there's no such thing as a terrible person or a terrible idea. Well, all this is saying, I have chaotic energy in me. I have negative energy within me. I have to know that that negative energy actually has a higher force. It's so powerful because it comes from a higher source within God. Now my job is not to suppress that negative desire or any negativity within my life. The job is to correct it, to channel it, to lift it up, to tell me what I really want, right? I really desire that chocolate cake. That's not what I really want. I really want pleasure. I really want closeness. I really want to feel good. That's what I want. Oh, so now understand that this desire for that feeling of comfort, that feeling of goodness could actually be achieved in a wholesome way. And then I elevate that desire and that what was a destructive energy. I elevated that because I connected back to its source. I explained to it what it really wanted. So again, the ramifications of this idea is immense. It's tremendous. It's transformative. And there's so much more to say. But I think that's enough for today. If anybody has any comments, questions, please share. Otherwise, have a wonderful day, and we should meet each other again in good health very soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Go ahead, Sarah. Go ahead, but just take off your mute. Good.
Okay, Rabbi, it brings you back to the idea of why did God do this? Why did he, either the Kabbalistic idea of, shattering a vessel, or the Adam and Eve idea, and starting humanity in this world, human beings in this. Why did God ever do this? Why has he created us?
So the short answer is, it's a good question. It's one of the fundamental questions of the Kabbalah. What's the purpose of all of creation? What's the purpose of creation of humanity? The short answer is that God wants It's not really it's not really an explanation, but God desires a relationship. God desires a relationship. To have a relationship, you need an other. So God has to create a reality where there's another. There's a creation, there's a human being, but not a human being. You can't have, not just any human being. You can't have a relationship with your clone. A lot of people, the problem is when they want to find a spouse, they can never find one. Why? Because what they really want is they want to marry a clone. They want to find someone who's, I'm perfect, right? I'm perfect. And then if I find someone perfect, the other perfect has to be just like me, right? That's not a relationship. A relationship is someone different than me. And because the person is different than me, there will be conflict. And you know something, that's the beauty really of a relationship. The conflict is not, it's not a defect in the product. The moment you're not marrying your clone, there's going to be conflict, right? Because the person is different than you. And actually what attracted you to them to begin with may have been the fact that you're different. So the conflict is not a defect in the product. The conflict is critical. In other words, if God wants a relationship with a real relationship, would mean with a creation that has its own idea, its own perspective, one that is not necessarily the divine perspective. And that's step number one. Step number two, if you want a relationship, if you want to bestow kindness on that creation, you have to give space for that person. You have to give space for that person to be able to contribute. Imagine you're in a relationship, let's say with a child, a very young child, you're doing everything. But if you maintain that relationship with the spouse or with an older child, it's not going to work. You can't give them everything. You have to give them space where they can contribute. Now, if everything is perfect in a perfect world, a human being cannot contribute because everything is perfect. Where are you going to contribute? So the meaning that God can give those who he wants a relationship with, in other words, meaning as in the ability to contribute, requires imperfection. And the more imperfection, the more profound our contribution. So why does God create a jungle? Why does he create a place with so much pain, with so much suffering, so imperfect? And the answer is, from the Kabbalah's perspective, the more imperfect, the more powerful and profound our potential for meaning. And now, all of a sudden, what looked like chaos is now order. Also, it makes sense. So there's a purpose. So the negativity also plays a role. It's part of the greater story. Okay, so now we have the puzzle. Now every part of the world, not just the positivity, but also the negativity is telling a story, because the negativity itself is telling you, what am I? Should you define me? I am here to give you an opportunity to contribute. That's what I am. It's not really negativity. I'm here to give you an opportunity to correct me.
What I also gathered from today is that, stop blaming other people or other events for your misery.
Right.
You are in charge of your own thinking, feeling, and connecting.
Correct. And you can correct it yourself. Right. That's a very powerful point. Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Have a nice day, Dr. Rabbi.
Thank you. Be well.
You too.
Thank you.